Ellie Miller, Program Manager for the Bridges and Bridges RTC program. Thanks for calling in today or dialing in. We're going to do a review of the Bridges Rental Assistance Program Request for Proposal. And joining me today is Gary Travis, the Human Service Representative with the Department of Human Services. DHS and Minnesota Housing work collaboratively to manage the Bridges and Bridges RTC program. Today's presentation is going to be about 30 minutes, and the remaining time will be used for questions. Minnesota Housing's mission is to provide access to safe, decent, affordable housing and build stronger communities across the state by offering products and services to help Minnesotans buy, fix up their homes, and stabilize neighborhoods, communities, and families. Minnesota Housing also supports the development and preservation of affordable rental housing through both the financing and long-term asset management of projects and developments. The agency has also pioneered a successful model for supportive housing that helps stabilize the lives of some of the state's most vulnerable citizens. The tutorial will cover the following topics today: an overview of Bridges and Bridges RTC, the application, some submission tips, and finally there will be a time to submit some questions. We're going to get started with the overview. Bridges and Bridges RTC will be a combined RFP this biennium. The grant cycle for both programs is a 2-year grant cycle beginning July 1, 2019 and ending June 30, 2021. Minnesota Housing has been authorized to operate rental assistance programs for people with mental illness. Bridges and Bridges RTC programs currently provide funding to 24 Bridges grantees and RTC grantees statewide, including counties, tribal nations, and community-based nonprofit organizations. Up to $10,277,000 is available for rental assistance for both programs. Bridges grants do not provide funding for services. Service funding is available through the Department of Human Services. The RFP instructions state that the available funding amount may change based on legislative appropriations. It's impossible to predict what the legislature will do, but I want you to be mindful of the amount because it is possible there could be a change in overall funding. It is important to note that if an applicant receives a high score and is recommended for funding, Minnesota Housing cannot award more than the amount requested by the applicant. It's important to think carefully about the amount you will be requesting and also consider your agency's capacity to deliver services if requesting a substantial increase. Applicant overview. New applicants will be considered if proposing to serve an unserved or underserved region of the state. Grantees that are currently subcontracting with agencies to serve the region are encouraged to discuss the current contract with their local mental health entity and decide if people would be better served if the sub-grantees had their own grants and counties within the service area. Current Bridges and Bridges RTC administrators are eligible applicants to apply as well. Eligible Bridges applicants must be a housing authority, tribal nation, nonprofit organization with demonstrated experience managing a state or federal rental assistance program or other low-income housing program. In order to be eligible, the applicant must also include a partnership with a local mental health entity. A local mental health entity is defined as the following: a local mental health authority operating under the authority of the county, a tribal nation mental health agency operating under the authority of the tribal government, or an adult mental health initiative, which is a collaboration of county LMHAs and or a tribal nation mental health agency that provides or enhances coordination of the delivery of mental health services required under the Minnesota Adult Mental Health Act. A cooperative agreement will also be required that outlines the responsibilities each entity will have under the contract. Participant overview. The eligible participants, the head of household or other household member, must be 18 years of age or over and have a diagnosed mental illness as defined in the Minnesota statute. A household is eligible to receive a housing choice voucher or can become eligible based on successful participation in the Bridges program. The gross income of the household at the time of the initial eligibility needs to be at or below 50% of the area median income for the household size. You may notice that the definition has changed slightly from serious mental illness to mental illness in the RFP documents regarding eligibility. This definition is in line with the statute and is not intended to exclude people with SMI from the program. Gary's going to spend a little time discussing this.
Minnesota does not have a specific definition of serious mental illness. The definition of mental illness identifies that mental illness, quote, seriously limits a person's capacity to function in primary aspects of daily living, such as personal relations, living arrangements, work, and recreation, close quote. Persons with serious and persistent mental illness are included in the mental illness definition.
The participant must be eligible to receive a housing choice voucher by the time they exit the Bridges program. If they have barriers that can be reduced while they're in the program, they are eligible. Bridges administrators must give priority to the following populations: people residing in an institution or other segregated setting who will be homeless upon discharge, people experiencing homelessness who are in need of a permanent supportive housing option as determined by the approved assessment tool and referred by coordinated entry, and or people who are experiencing homelessness and are at imminent risk of homelessness. Highest priority must be given to people residing in an institution or other segregated settings who will be homeless upon discharge. A well-established relationship should be in place with coordinated entry, and a process of receiving applicants experiencing homelessness should be in place.
Clearly identify the service partnerships and resources that will be provided to support the level of services needed by participants.
Under the Bridges RTC program, an eligible participant is defined as a person with mental illness who is eligible for Bridges and who is referred from these institutions and who have a significant and complex housing barriers.
Be sure to identify how the services will address the significant and complex barriers identified in the application.
The following are the eligible uses of the funds, both for Bridges and Bridges RTC. Direct payment to the landlord for subsidy portion, direct payment to the landlord for security deposits, direct payment to the landlord for application fee for assisted units only, direct payment to the landlord for contract rent for up to 90 days during a medical or psychiatric crisis, and your administrative fee. The administrative fee will be paid each month in which a participant resides in an eligible assisted unit. Minnesota Housing will approve administration fees that range from $45 per household per month to $60 per household per month based on the target number of households, the amount of the grant, the geography of the service area, the population served, and other relevant criteria. Current applicants must reapply with their current admin fee. New applicants must propose application fees based on the described criteria. Following our program expectations, Bridges grantees are required to participate in the local mental health entity meetings at least twice a year and must have a collaborative working relationship with the entity in order to best serve people with mental illness who are experiencing housing instability. Each activity is carried out by the Bridges grantee, the local mental health entity, or both. Responsibilities vary for different implementations and must be described in the cooperative agreement.
Additionally, this active partnership helps to meet the housing mission statement of the Comprehensive Adult Mental Health Act.
Foundational service practices are essential for the population served by Bridges and Bridges RTC to gain access to the program. It is required that grantees have integrated these practices, have ways to continue to improve their practices, and seek partnerships that do the same. For all grantees, state monitoring will take place annually and more frequently if needed. If you have sub-grantees under contract to cover the service area, you will be required to have formal agreements and to monitor the subgrantees annually and as needed. An annual progress report is new as a requirement and will require grantees to monitor and track information that has not been required in the past. At Minnesota Housing, as we complete monitoring over the next biennium, we're going to be asking providers to collect data to continue to improve their outreach and participation to diverse groups, especially groups disparately impacted by homelessness. The annual progress report, that is a new expectation for this contract round, we'll be asking that you track more closely how you're serving people disparately impacted by homelessness. Let's now get into the details of the application. The goals of the application and scoring methodology are to incentivize grantees to be high-performing agencies that strive to serve Bridges participants in the best way possible and that track their outcomes to continue to improve program practices.
And just a reminder that the Bridges RTC focuses on a specific priority population.
The applications that satisfy the minimum threshold criteria will be scored using the following competitive criteria. The application is worth 65%, and the performance of the organization is worth 35%. I want to take a moment to emphasize that it is a competitive process. I had quite a few emails this morning asking if the current grantees were applying for a renewal, and the language that Minnesota Housing is using is that the RFP is a competitive process. So all applicants will be coming in and be scored based on this competitive criteria. Because new applicants will not have a score for prior performance, they will be asked to provide answers to 4 additional questions in the application. The answers will be used to determine a performance score for the new applicants. The following tables in the next slides highlight the points for each applicant category as well as performance. The application has 5 sections for all applicants. Each section will be reviewed today in the presentation. Applicants applying for RTC have 1 additional section, as do applicants. Existing grantees have a performance section that they will be scored on. In the scoring methodology, the first section is priority population. Bridges is designed to assist people with high needs through the provision of a housing subsidy that is linked with community mental health services. To achieve this goal, administrators must give highest priority to people residing in an institution or other segregated setting who will be homeless upon discharge. In 2015, Bridges' priority shifted from homeless population to people exiting institutions. The second part of the scoring methodology is about program design and implementation. An applicant must have the ability to serve the region named in the application and have resources available to move participants to permanent subsidies. Programs that monitor utilization and have administrators that prioritize permanent subsidies for Bridges participants tend to have positive outcomes. The next section is diversity and inclusion. Bridges is intended to serve people with mental illness. Applicants should also be serving diverse populations and creating strategies to reach underserved populations and groups disparately impacted by homelessness. Foundational service practices identify areas of program implementation believed to have the greatest potential to positively impact outcomes for people experiencing homelessness. The goal of the service practices are to establish standards that more effectively serve individuals and families who experience challenges in accessing and maintaining participation in the program. Foundational service practices are related to the documents required for enrollment, frequency of required in-person appointments, mailing address and phone number requirements, communication methods, criminal history, and documenting housing status. The last section is for all grantees is services. Applicants must have good collaborative partners and have service models in place that create choice for participants and assist them with housing stability and the transition to a permanent subsidy. The scoring methodology section for Bridges RTC only is on the last page. RTC must complete all the applicant areas of the application and would also be scored on a few separate questions that are specific to the RTC program, giving RTC applicants a score of 105 points. Current grantees must complete all the applicant areas and will be scored based on your current performance. You will not need to submit anything for this section other than the information requested in the Bridges budget form. Minnesota Housing will complete a performance review and submit the information for scoring. After the grant review committee has met and the scores have been finalized, state agency staff may incorporate the scores into final funding recommendations. It may also be based on geographic distribution, services to special populations, and the applicant's history as a state grantee and capacity to perform the work. Final funding amounts will be dependent on the amount requested, the number of applicants, and the amount of funding available to distribute. Applicants with scores below 50 points may not be funded, or they may be given conditional funding and be required to receive technical assistance. Decisions are at Minnesota Housing's sole discretion. Additionally, Minnesota Housing reserves the right to propose revisions during the due diligence phase of the contract period, which is after Minnesota Housing Board approval, but before the contract is executed. I'm going to go through the Bridges budget form. The section's going to provide sort of an overview of the tabs, and I'll walk you through the highlights. I also wanted to note that this morning there was an applicant that noted a few errors on the budget form. So the the web team put a new version just recently back up onto the website. So if you downloaded this form prior to this morning, I would highly recommend going back in and finding the current revised form. So on your screen, you should be able to see the first tab of the budget form. The first tab highlights the instructions on how to complete the following tabs. If you have trouble and question what you should be entering on the tab, please refer back to that instructions page. The first tab is the Bridges summary. So all Bridges applicants that are requesting funding will fill out all the yellow fields on this tab. The next tab is contact information. All applicants, both Bridges and Bridges RTC, will fill out the yellow spaces on this tab as well. The next tab is for people applying for Bridges funding. This is the Bridges utilization projection for your funding request. It's essentially your budget and what you're requesting in funding. All the yellow spaces on this tab need to be completed as well. Bridges RTC, people applying specifically for RTC will complete this summary and complete the yellow fields as necessary on this form.
The yellow fields may be displaying as white fields.
Okay. So as you see them, as they're coming up on the web, yeah, there's sort of a pale color, I guess, on our presenter frame, but when you pull it down from the website, they'll be clearly yellow. And the instruction page does indicate that it's the yellow fields that you do need to complete. So RTC summary, just like the Bridges summary, if you're applying for this funding, you need to complete this tab. And then there's a Bridges RTC utilization tab as well that need to be completed for that funding. The current grantees for Bridges have an additional tab. If you're a new applicant, you do not need to complete this to apply for Bridges. And it was noted that there wasn't a Bridges RTC tab, so we have added this tab for current RTC grantees. Again, completing the yellow field on all of these tabs. This workbook needs to be completed in full and submitted with your application. Give me 1 second and I'll get the presentation back up. So we're going to continue on. Right now you can see the notes version. There we go. So the application checklist includes the submittal of the application signature page, the budget form, and one budget form should be submitted if applying for both Bridges and Bridges RTC. The form should include funding requests and information on the applicable tabs for both programs. And then finally, a draft cooperative agreement. There'll be 2 draft cooperative agreements if you're applying for both Bridges and Bridges RTC. The application also includes the current local payment standards for each part of the service area. For Bridges applicants only, you'll be providing a proposed Bridges waitlist selection plan. The rental assistance qualification form 216A needs to be completed, and there's a link to that in the application. And finally, need to provide evidence of the most recent Section 8 Management Assessment Program score or other evidence of rental assistance administration performance. Most of you will be applying for more than $100,000, so this will apply to you. You will need to determine if you are subject to the Minnesota Human Rights Act. Completing the affirmative action form is important. In addition, you also need to provide documentation of compliance if the box you check on the form indicates that you need to do so. If you're applying and are a non-governmental entity, you must provide your financial statements. The type of financial statement you provide is related to your agency's overall budget, not the amount that you are applying for in this application, but rather how much the applicant's agency has in total gross revenue in a given year. If you are selected for funding, you will be required to submit due diligence items. In prior bienniums, we were given some leeway on the execution date of agreements, meaning that they could be executed after July 1 and still be retroactive to July 1. This is no longer allowable. All of the required due diligence items must be submitted to us by Friday, May 31st, 2019, in order for us to execute an agreement by July 1. If due diligence items are late, we will have to execute your agreement as of the time we receive the items, which means your contract will not be retroactive. Any payments made after July 1 without a signed contract will not be reimbursed. On the pages are listed here the due diligence items that will be requested: the signed grant contract, board resolution, certificate of insurance with employee dishonesty and crime coverage, electronic funds transfer authorization form. For a new applicant that has been selected, you need to submit that, or if your current EFT is on file, that needs to be updated. A current certificate of good standing issued by Minnesota Secretary of State office within 30 days, and a screenshot is also acceptable form of that evidence. The cooperative agreement should be final executed copy between the 2 entities, the Housing Authority and the local mental health entity. And then the Bridges waiting list selection plan for Bridges applicants only. A cooperative agreement sample has been included in the application materials. This should serve as a guide in creating your agreement. If you're applying for Bridges and Bridges RTC, again, you'll need to have 2 separate cooperative agreements. You will also see this in the RFP instructions, but I wanted to provide the timeline for the RFP. Applications must be submitted by Friday, March 8th at 12 p.m. noon. Minnesota Housing, and that's Central Time. Minnesota Housing staff will make recommendations to the Minnesota Housing Board on Thursday, April 25th, and those selected should receive notification of our decision by Wednesday, May 1st, 2019. If awarded funds, we will then enter the due diligence phase, and selected agencies will be expected to submit back to us due diligence items that we discussed earlier. As mentioned previously, in prior bienniums, we were given some leeway on the execution date of agreements, which meant they could be executed after July 1 and still be retroactive to July 1. This is no longer allowable. Thus, all the required due diligence items must be submitted to us no later than Friday, May 31st, 2019, in order for us to execute an agreement by July 1st. If due diligence items are late, we will have to execute your agreement as of the time we receive the items, which means your contract will not be retroactive. The last few details, the actual submission. All application materials must be submitted in their original format to the secure upload tool, which can be found on our website. Instructions on how to use this secure upload tool can be found on the website as well. I can't emphasize enough the importance of submitting the right documents with the right information. On the day that we receive applications, our staff must ensure that the applications meet threshold criteria. This happens before we review application materials in their entirety and before we hand off applications to reviewers to score. Everyone should highlight these bullets because if you do not complete one of these tasks, your application could be rejected before it's even reviewed. Submit the application on Friday, March 8th, 2019 before 12 Central Time. Make sure you answer every question on the application, sign the application, and as mentioned before, submit a signature page, and include the budget form and ensure it's complete. And if you have any questions along the way before you submit your application, please don't hesitate to send me an email or give me a call. Thank you again.